The polished marble floors of the county courthouse offered no warmth. I walked down the long, echoing corridor toward probate courtroom number 4, my dress shoes clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the stone. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. I carried a single manila folder tucked tightly under my right arm. Inside that folder was the final will of my late father, a document that legally named me the sole executor of his $12 million commercial real estate portfolio. My father built his company one brick at a time. He started 40 years ago with a single, modest corner diner. He poured coffee every morning, listened to his customers, and treated the neighborhood kids so well that the locals eventually just called the place Coffee with Grandpa. From that single diner, he purchased the building, then the block, and eventually amassed a real estate empire. He was a practical, hard-working man who despised waste and valued loyalty above everything else. My mother, Margaret, was his exact opposite. They divorced 15 years ago after my father discovered she had siphoned nearly $500,000 from his primary business accounts. She used the money to fund an unsustainable lifestyle of elite country club memberships, luxury vehicles, and international vacations with her high society friends. When his health failed last year, he called his lawyers and updated his will to ensure she could never touch a single dime of his legacy. He left her exactly $1. It was a calculated legal maneuver to prove to the courts that she was intentionally excluded from the inheritance, not merely forgotten in a moment of illness. I reached the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. I took a deep breath, expecting a tense but straightforward legal proceeding to finalize the transfer of the estate. I pushed the brass handles down, opened the doors, and stepped inside the quiet room. Margaret was already seated at the petitioner's table. She wore a tailored black mourning dress, a veil of false grief draped flawlessly over her shoulders. Next to her sat a sharp-suited attorney holding a thick stack of pristine legal documents. When the wooden doors clicked shut behind me, my mother turned her head. She did not look sad. A cold, calculating smirk touched the corners of her mouth. I took exactly 3 steps down the center aisle. "That is her. Officer, she is violating the order!" Margaret shrieked. Her voice broke into a theatrical, flawless panic that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, shrinking back in her chair as if I were holding a weapon. Before I could even process the words she was screaming, the space around me erupted into motion. 3 court bailiffs stationed near the wooden gallery benches lunged forward. They did not ask for my name. They did not ask for identification. They moved with the trained precision of law enforcement, responding to an active, dangerous threat inside a courthouse. A shoulder caught me right under the ribs. All the air left my lungs in a sharp, painful rush as the impact drove me backward. My feet left the carpet. I hit the hardwood floor hard, the impact jarring my teeth and sending a shockwave up my spine. Before I could even attempt to inhale, a knee dropped onto my back, pinning me flat against the dusty floorboards. Someone grabbed my right arm, twisting the limb behind my back until the shoulder joint burned with raw pain. The manila folder slipped from my grasp, its contents scattering across the floor. "Stop resisting! Keep your hands where I can see them!" A voice barked right next to my ear. "I am not resisting," I gasped, pressing my cheek against the cold wood. The smell of floor wax and old leather filled my nose. What is going on? I am the executor. I am here for the estate hearing. "You are in direct violation of a permanent protective order," the bailiff said. He snapped a pair of cold steel handcuffs around my wrists. The metal bit sharply into my skin as he tightened the mechanism. He grabbed my bicep and hauled me up to my knees. "You are under arrest." I looked up, breathing through my teeth. The courtroom spun slightly. The judge, an older man with graying hair and dark robes, watched the scene unfold from his elevated bench with a severe, punishing frown. But my eyes bypassed the judge and found Margaret. She was standing now, clutching her attorney's arm, acting terrified for the benefit of the court record. Yet as I knelt there in handcuffs, humiliated and restrained in front of the entire gallery, her eyes locked onto mine. The mask of the terrified victim slipped for a fraction of a second. She smiled. It was a vicious, triumphant smile that communicated everything I needed to know. The pieces clicked together in my head. If an appointed executor fails to appear for their hearing or is deemed legally unfit due to violent criminal behavior, the court can legally appoint the next of kin to manage the estate. Margaret had filed a fake restraining order against me, timing it perfectly so the court system would ambush me the exact second I walked into the room. She wanted me arrested, dragged out the side door, and locked in a holding cell while she convinced the judge to hand over control of the $12 million portfolio. "Your Honor," Margaret's attorney spoke up, his tone dripping with practiced professional sympathy. "My client is terrified for her life. We submitted the protective order to the county clerk yesterday afternoon. The respondent has a documented history of erratic, threatening behavior. We ask that she be removed from the premises immediately so we can proceed with the emergency transfer of the estate to her mother." The bailiff yanked on my arm, preparing to drag me toward the side exit. "Wait," I said. My voice was raspy from having the wind knocked out of me, but the tone was rock, steady. I refused to break eye contact with the judge. "Your Honor, I have never been served a restraining order in my entire life. My mother is committing perjury right now to steal my father's estate. The document bears a judge's signature from the neighboring county," Judge Miller stated sternly. He looked down at a paper resting on his desk. "It claims you went to her house and made repeated specific threats against her life exactly 3 days ago. It states you threatened to harm her if she showed up to this hearing." 3 days ago?" I repeated. A sudden sharp surge of adrenaline cut through the throbbing pain in my shoulder. I looked at Margaret. Her smug expression wavered slightly at my calm tone. "Your Honor," I said, shifting my weight on the hard floor, "I can prove that document is a complete fabrication. I can prove my mother committed a felony to orchestrate this arrest. But I need my phone. It is in my left pocket." The judge stared at me in silence. The bailiff tightened his grip on my arm, waiting for the order to remove me. Margaret's attorney stepped forward, opening his mouth to issue a loud objection. "Let her speak," the judge ordered, raising his hand. "Officer, retrieve the phone." The kneeling position on the hard wooden floor sent sharp aches through my knees, but I ignored the discomfort. I kept my breathing steady. The bailiff standing over me hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching his thick hand into the left pocket of my suit trousers. He pulled out my smartphone. The screen remained dark. "My hands are cuffed behind my back," I said, directing my words to the bench. "I need the officer to hold the screen up to my face so the biometric scanner can unlock the device." Judge Miller gave a brief nod. The bailiff crouched down and held the phone in front of my face. The padlock icon on the screen clicked open instantly. "Open the primary video streaming application," I instructed the bailiff. "Go to my profile and tap the most recent live broadcast." Margaret shifted in her chair. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. She leaned closer to her attorney, whispering something rapidly into his ear. Her attorney narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by the sudden deviation from their carefully orchestrated ambush. "What exactly are we looking for?" Judge Miller asked, folding his hands on his desk. "The restraining order claims I was standing on my mother's front porch exactly 3 days ago at 4 o'clock in the afternoon," I explained, my voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "It claims I was banging on her door and screaming threats regarding my father's $12 million estate. But at exactly 4 o'clock on that specific day, I was sitting inside my father's original diner, 45 miles away." The bailiff tapped the screen. A video began to play. The audio was muted, but the moving images were bright and clear. My father started a community outreach program through his diner, a tradition the locals affectionately named Coffee with Grandpa, I continued, stating the name of the channel for the court record. Every single month, we host a live question and answer session online to discuss local neighborhood investments. I did not cancel this month's session despite his passing, because he specifically asked me to keep the tradition alive. Margaret's attorney stood up, hastily buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, a digital video is not an airtight alibi. Videos can be recorded weeks in advance and uploaded later to create a false timeline. This is a desperate attempt to distract the court from a valid, sworn protective order. It was a live broadcast, I countered smoothly, keeping my eyes locked on the judge. If the officer unmutes the device and skips to exactly the 12-minute mark, the court will hear me reading real-time comments from the live chat and answering them. Furthermore, sitting directly next to me in that video, sharing a cup of coffee at exactly 4 o'clock, is City Councilman Robert Davies. We were discussing the new park renovations. A thick, suffocating tension dropped over the petitioner's table. City Councilman Robert Davies was a highly respected local official. He was also a former county prosecutor. The idea that Margaret would inadvertently use a former prosecutor as an unwitting alibi in her perjury trap was a nightmare for any defense attorney. Officer, Judge Miller commanded, his tone dropping an octave, bring that device to the bench right now. The bailiff stood up and walked the phone up the wooden steps, handing it directly to the judge. The courtroom fell entirely silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning vents above us. I remained on my knees, the cold steel handcuffs biting into my wrists, watching the judge examine the glowing screen. Judge Miller tapped the screen, unmuting the audio. Faint, tinny voices drifted from the phone speakers. He watched the footage for exactly 2 minutes. He checked the upload timestamp. He checked the live chat replay. He scrutinized the face of the city councilman sitting next to me in the video. Then, Judge Miller slowly placed the phone face down on his desk. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Margaret. The smug, victorious smirk had vanished from my mother's face. Her skin turned a pale, sickly shade of chalk. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. She looked at her attorney, but he had already taken a half step away from her chair. He was a man who charged $500 an hour, and he knew instantly that his client had just dragged him into a massive, undeniable perjury trap. Counselor, Judge Miller said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Your client submitted a sworn affidavit under the penalty of perjury to the county clerk. She explicitly swore that her daughter was at her residence 3 days ago at 4 o'clock. Yet, I am looking at undisputed video evidence of the respondent sitting in a public diner, interacting with a city official, 45 miles away at that exact minute. The attorney cleared his throat, adjusting his tie with nervous, jerky movements. Your Honor, my client may have been mistaken about the exact time or the specific day. Grief can cause significant memory lapses. Grief does not draft detailed, fraudulent legal documents to orchestrate a courtroom ambush, Judge Miller fired back, his patience depleted. This was a calculated attempt to manipulate the legal system, effectuate a false arrest, and unlawfully seize control of a $12 million estate. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled on the table. The illusion of the terrified victim was shattered, leaving only the reality of a greedy, desperate woman caught in a lie. Bailiff, Judge Miller ordered, pointing a stern finger at me. Remove those handcuffs immediately. She's not the one who belongs in them today. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked open. The sudden release of pressure sent a rush of hot blood down my arms, making my fingertips tingle with a sharp, burning sensation. The bailiff stepped back, keeping his eyes fixed on the floorboards, offering a low, muttered apology under his breath. I brought my arms forward, rubbing the deep red indentations pressed firmly into my wrists. I did not rush. I took my time standing up, letting the entire courtroom watch the physical toll of my mother's perjury. I knelt back down for just a moment to gather the papers that had spilled from my manila folder. I stacked them neatly, tapping the edges against the hardwood floor to align the pages, and walked directly to the petitioner's table. I did not sit down. I stood tall, placing the folder on the polished wood in front of me. Margaret watched my approach like I was a ghost. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning bone white. Her carefully applied makeup now looked like a porcelain mask cracking under immense pressure. "Your Honor," Margaret's attorney interjected, his voice lacking all of its previous confidence. He frantically shuffled his own papers, desperately looking for a legal exit strategy. In light of this new video evidence, my client would like to officially withdraw the protective order. We can reschedule the estate hearing for a later date next month to allow familial tensions to cool down. "You cannot withdraw a sworn affidavit after it has been proven fraudulent in open court," Judge Miller stated flatly. He glared at the attorney over the rim of his glasses. "You are asking the court to simply ignore a malicious prosecution and a false arrest. Your client used the justice system as a weapon. That is not a clerical error we can sweep under the rug and reschedule. We are going to address the $12 million estate right now." I opened my manila folder. The top document was the final will and testament of my father. My father was a very observant man. I addressed the court, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet room. He built his entire business on anticipating market shifts and understanding human nature. When he was diagnosed with his terminal illness 11 months ago, he knew exactly how my mother would react. He knew she would view his death as her final opportunity to secure the wealth she lost in the divorce. I slid the thick, cream-colored pages of the will across the table toward the court clerk. "The will explicitly names me as the sole executor and primary beneficiary," I continued. "It leaves my mother exactly $1, but my father also instructed his legal team to include a specific, undeniable contingency clause in the 4th section of the document, anticipating a direct legal attack from her." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes darting between me and the folder. "He left me $1 15 years ago," she hissed, abandoning the grieving widow act entirely. "I am entitled to half of that diner. I helped him build the foundation of that company. You cannot just cut me out because of a petty grudge." "It was not a grudge," I replied, looking down at her. "It was survival. You nearly bankrupted his business to pay for your country club fees." Judge Miller picked up the will from the clerk. "Direct my attention to the contingency clause, please." "Page 12, Section 4, Paragraph 2, Your Honor," I instructed. "My father designated a secondary, independent corporate trustee to assume immediate control of the estate if I am ever incapacitated, incarcerated, or legally blocked from fulfilling my duties. He specifically named the regional director of a major national bank." I watched the realization hit Margaret's attorney. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "If my mother had successfully kept me locked in a holding cell today," I explained, turning to face her, "the court would not have handed the $12 million to her. The estate would automatically transfer into a blind corporate trust, locked behind layers of bank bureaucracy, entirely inaccessible to her or anyone else in our family for exactly 10 years. Margaret stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Her grand, chaotic plan to orchestrate a fake arrest and steal the portfolio was fundamentally broken from the start. Even if her perjury had worked perfectly, she would not have seen a single penny. My father had built an impenetrable wall around his legacy, and she had just committed a felony trying to climb it. "Furthermore, Your Honor," I said, pulling a second smaller stack of papers from my folder, "my father hired a private investigative firm during the last 2 months of his life. He noticed strange inquiries regarding the deeds to his commercial properties. This report, submitted by a licensed investigator, contains documented proof that Margaret Vance spent the last 4 weeks attempting to bribed 2 different county clerks to alter the property titles before he passed. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The air felt charged with the devastating weight of the evidence. The report includes copies of emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls, I explained, sliding the thick stack of evidence toward the clerk. Margaret offered a county clerk exactly $25,000 to mysteriously lose the updated deeds and reinstate an older version of the corporate paperwork. When the clerk refused, she pivoted to this fake restraining order as her absolute last resort. Judge Miller read through the first page of the private investigator's report. His expression darkened with every sentence. He set the paper down and looked directly at Margaret. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Miller said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "you have attempted to defraud a $12 million estate, submitted falsified documents to a county judge, and used the sworn officers of this court as your personal thugs to falsely imprison your own daughter." Margaret shrank back into her chair. The bravado, the fake tears, the calculated smirk. Everything was gone. She looked small, desperate, and entirely cornered. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse, but Judge Miller raised his hand, cutting her off instantly. "Do not say a single word," he commanded. "Counselor, I strongly suggest you advise your client to exercise her right to remain silent, because her situation is about to become exponentially worse." Judge Miller adjusted his thick black robes and leaned entirely forward over the elevated mahogany bench. The stack of private investigative files rested directly under his hands. He did not quickly skim the pages. He read each documented email, each transcribed text message, and every sworn witness statement with the slow, deliberate focus of a magistrate preparing to dismantle a life. The silence in the courtroom stretched for exactly 3 agonizing minutes. I stood perfectly still at the petitioner's table. Margaret sat rigidly on the respondent's side, her breathing shallow and frantic, watching the judge dissect her grand conspiracy piece by piece. "The evidence presented to this court is staggering," Judge Miller began, his deep voice filling the cavernous room without a microphone. "We are not simply discussing a grieving widow acting irrationally. We are looking at a sustained, deeply calculated, and highly illegal campaign to defraud a $12 million commercial real estate portfolio." He picked up the final will and testament of my late father, holding the cream-colored document up for the court clerk to see. "The court has reviewed the original, notarized testament of the deceased," Judge Miller announced, striking his wooden gavel once against the sounding block. "The document is legally sound, properly witnessed, and undisputed by any credible evidence. I am officially certifying this will. The $12 million estate, including all commercial properties, liquid assets, and corporate holding accounts, is formally transferred to the designated executor and sole beneficiary." The gavel struck a second time. The sharp, concussive crack sealed my father's legacy exactly as he intended. The diner, the commercial blocks, the entire lifetime of his grueling work was finally safe from the woman who almost destroyed it 15 years ago. But the gavel did not lower. Judge Miller kept the wooden handle gripped tightly in his right fist, turning his severe gaze onto my mother. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, the authority of the county judicial system bearing down on her trembling shoulders. "You walked into my courtroom today and utilized a sworn protective order as a tactical weapon. You manipulated the local police department to ambush an innocent woman, effectuate a false arrest, and publicly humiliate the rightful heir to an estate you have zero legal claim over." Margaret opened her mouth, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Your Honor, I was desperate. I have massive debts. The country club fees, the mortgage on my house, they are overwhelming me. My ex-husband owed me that money for the years I spent supporting his dreams before he became wealthy." "He owed you nothing," Judge Miller fired back, cutting her off instantly. The divorce settlement finalized 15 years ago explicitly severed all financial obligations. Your inability to manage your personal finances does not grant you the right to orchestrate a massive legal fraud. The judge picked up the private investigator's report, tapping the stack of paper against his desk. This report documents your attempt to bribe a county clerk with exactly $25,000, Judge Miller read aloud, his tone dripping with judicial disgust. When that felony failed, you committed perjury by swearing under oath that your daughter threatened your life exactly 3 days ago. We have indisputable video evidence proving she was 45 miles away, sitting next to a highly respected city councilman. You did not just lie to this court, you actively weaponized it. Margaret's attorney stood up. His face was devoid of color. He buttoned his suit jacket with stiff, precise movements. He did not look at his client. "Your Honor," the attorney stated, his voice hollow, "under the strict ethical guidelines of the State Bar Association, I am officially requesting immediate permission to withdraw as legal counsel for the respondent. I cannot represent a client who has submitted fraudulent documents, committed perjury in open court, and engaged in bribery of a public official without my knowledge." Margaret snapped her head toward him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "What are you doing? You cannot abandon me right now. I paid you a $5,000 retainer fee just to appear here today." "You paid me to represent a terrified victim in a standard protective order." "Hearing," the attorney replied coldly, picking up his leather briefcase from the floor. "You did not pay me to act as an unwitting accomplice to a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I am withdrawing my representation." "Request granted," Judge Miller ruled instantly. "Counselor, you are dismissed from this hearing." The attorney turned on his heel and walked briskly down the center aisle, pushing through the heavy oak doors and leaving Margaret isolated at the large mahogany table. She was no longer a wealthy socialite represented by high-priced legal talent. She was an unrepresented civilian facing down a furious federal judge. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Miller said, his voice dropping into a terrifying register, "the county prosecutor's office will be receiving a full, unredacted transcript of today's proceedings, along with the digital video evidence and the private investigator's comprehensive report." Margaret began to hyperventilate. The fake tears she had planned to use to sway the court were replaced by genuine, uncontrollable panic. She looked wildly around the room, as if expecting a hidden door to open and offer her an escape from the nightmare she had built for herself. "But I am not waiting for the prosecutor to draft a formal indictment to address the blatant disrespect you have shown this courtroom today," Judge Miller continued, raising his hand to signal the bailiffs standing near the gallery benches. "You used my court officers to physically tackle and handcuff an innocent woman. You will now experience the exact legal consequence you planned for her." Judge Miller pointed his wooden gavel directly at the 3 uniformed court bailiffs standing at attention near the wooden gallery benches. It was the exact same team of officers who had physically tackled me to the hardwood floor just 30 minutes prior. They moved with the identical, trained precision of law enforcement, responding to an active threat. But this time, their target was rigidly seated at the respondent's table. "Bailiff!" Judge Miller commanded, his voice echoing off the dark mahogany panels with unyielding authority. "Take Mrs. Vance into immediate physical custody. I am holding her in direct criminal contempt of this court for committing blatant perjury and submitting a fraudulent protective order. She is to be transported directly to the county holding facility, where she will remain incarcerated without bail pending her formal arraignment on multiple felony charges." Margaret shoved her leather chair backward. The grating sound of wood scraping against wood filled the silent courtroom. She stumbled to her feet, her black mourning dress looking ridiculous on a woman trying to flee a furious judge. "No, you cannot do this to me," Margaret shrieked, backing away from the officers. I am a respected member of this community. I am a grieving widow. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Please, I will withdraw the petition. Let me go home." "You do not have a home to go to, Mrs. Vance," Judge Miller replied coldly, striking his gavel. "Your assets are frozen pending a criminal fraud investigation. You are going to a concrete holding cell." The lead bailiff, the same broad-shouldered man who had pinned my shoulder to the floorboards, reached Margaret in 3 strides. He grabbed her right arm, hauling her physically forward, and forcefully twisted her wrist behind her back. Margaret let out a guttural scream of pure panic, abandoning her high society composure. She thrashed wildly, but the supporting officers instantly pinned her against the petitioner's table. The cold, solid steel handcuffs ratcheted shut around her wrists. The sharp metallic clicks cut through the dead silence of the courtroom. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead bailiff recited coldly, spinning her toward the main exit. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Help me," Margaret wailed, twisting her tear-stained face back to look directly at me. "I am your mother. I gave birth to you. You cannot let them lock me in a cage over a piece of paper. Tell them you forgive me. Tell them to stop." I stood still beside the mahogany table. I picked up the manila folder containing the legally certified will of my late father, tucking it securely under my right arm. I walked slowly toward the center aisle, stopping exactly 2 feet away from the ruined woman who had orchestrated my false arrest to steal a $12 million inheritance. "You stopped being my mother exactly 15 years ago when you tried to bankrupt the business my father built with his bare hands," I replied quietly. "You wanted me to leave this courtroom in handcuffs today. I am simply making sure you get exactly what you asked for. Enjoy your new lifestyle." I turned my back on her entirely. I simply listened as her desperate screaming slowly faded into the corridors of the courthouse until the heavy doors slammed shut, plunging Probate Courtroom number 4 into a profound, peaceful silence. The $12 million estate was permanently locked in my name. The legacy of Coffee with Grandpa was safe. Exactly 18 months later, I stood behind the original polished wooden counter of my father's first diner. I was pouring a hot cup of black coffee for a regular customer. The diner was packed with local neighborhood families, exactly the way my father had always loved it. The $12 million commercial real estate portfolio had not just survived his passing, it was thriving under my fiduciary control. Margaret's criminal trial was brief and devastating. Faced with the undeniable video evidence of my alibi, the documented investigator's report regarding her bribery attempt, and the testimony of her own former defense attorney, her public defender forced her to accept a brutal plea deal. She pled guilty to the felony fabrication of a legal protective order, attempted wire fraud, and 2 counts of direct courtrooms, perjury. She was sentenced to exactly 5 years in a state penitentiary. To satisfy the mountain of personal debt she had recklessly accumulated, the federal bankruptcy courts forced the immediate liquidation of her suburban house, her luxury vehicles, and her expensive jewelry. She was officially expelled from her elite country club. She is currently wearing a scratchy orange jumpsuit, spending her days isolated in a small concrete cell. She thought she could weaponize the local police department to execute a courtroom ambush and steal a $12 million inheritance. Instead, she locked her own steel cell door from the inside, obliterated her own luxurious life, and handed me the keys to the real estate empire while wearing the exact same handcuffs she had ordered for me. If your toxic mother secretly filed a fraudulent protective order to have you tackled and arrested inside a courtroom to steal your inheritance, would you have settled it privately or used her own trap to destroy her life in front of a judge? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.